Okay, this is the actual live recording. Maseches Eruvin Daf Samech, starting another new set of 10s, starting the Samechs. And tonight we'll learn to the Mishnah on the bottom of Samech Aleph, Amud Aleph, and then in Yirtzeh Hashem on Shabbos we'll do another blot and a half and finish the parak entirely, move on to parak Hadar. Yirtzeh Hashem. All right, we're getting there. We're about 60 blot into the Masechta. We're starting on the bottom of Nun Tes Amud Beis. About 8 lines or so from the bottom, Ba'i Minei Rav Ami. The last thing we learned yesterday was about someone who had built an Eruvin in a city, and he was then criticized for it because he had forgotten to take into account one factor, which is that when it was initially built, there was a garbage heap at one entrance, and it was therefore an unusable entrance, and it was since removed, and he made an error. So now the Gemara is going to take a little bit of a jump and say, well, let's say there's a ladder at the end of the alleyway. Does that alleyway with a ladder, is that now considered to be just like an open wall? Or no, is it still considered to be a closed wall? So that's the Gemara, the question the Gemara phrases right here. Ba'emine Rav Ami bar Ada harpena'ame Rabba. The question was asked to Rabba, Sulam mikanu, Pesach mikan. Let's say you have what looks like a Rishus HaRabim. On one end you have a ladder, and on the other end it's totally open. So is that considered to be what we would call in our language mefulash? Is that considered to be an open route all the way through? Mahu, what's the din? Amar le hachi amar Rav. So Rabba answers, quoting Rav from a few generations earlier, and he says, Sulam Toras Pesach alav, categorical, that a Sulam has the din of a Pesach. Now in this case, that's a Chumrah, because that makes it a Rishus HaRabim. That makes it a Rishus HaRabim, and therefore you can't have an Eruv. So then says the Gemara, Amar Luhu Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said back to Rabba, you are mistaken. Lo tatzisule, don't listen to Rabba. Hachi Amar Rav Ada bar Ahava Amar Rav, just a machlokes in the Girsa. Not a machlokes, a mistake. It should say Rav Ada bar Ahava Amar Rav. And what did Rav teach about ladders? Sulam Toras Pesach alav, the Toras Mechitza alav. It has either or. And that just really depends on whether or not you are going to use it as a kula. In other words, this is not written here explicitly in the Gemara, but this is how the Rishonim understand. Rashi understands it this way, and everybody does based on the flow of the Gemara. It becomes obvious that what Rav Ada bar Ava is saying in the name of Rav is that a ladder is always used leniently. So let's say it's in the back of an alleyway that leads to that then closes off a Rishus HaRabim. So we'd make it lenient and it would be a mechitza. And if you needed it to be open, you wanted to carry from klutzer to klutzer, then we could use it as a kula. It's fine. Ladders are always used leniently. So then says the Gemara, Toras mechitza alav kida amran. I've already given you a case where using a mechitza is kida amran. We use the ladder as a wall to prevent the Rishus from being a Rishus HaRabim Doraisa. Beautiful. What about Toras Pesach alav b'sulam? So that we have Shebein Shtei Chatzeros. That exists between two Chatzeros. Let's say that you and I share a Chatzer, and there's a ladder that goes between us. Our kids can crawl up one side and down the other. So we basically have a connected Chatzer. And therefore, what's the implications? It's lenient. We're using this Eruv now as a lenient. Now it's a Pesach. It's not a Mechitza. Ratzu echad me'arev, ratzu shnai me'arev. You can either be me'arev as one unit or you can be me'arev separately. It doesn't make a difference. We treat you as leniently, at that you are basically connected as one. Says the Gemara, do we always use a sulam leniently? Is that really true? Umiyamar of Nachman Hachi, last line of Nun Tes Amud Beis, says the Gemara, are we always lenient when it comes to a sulam? After all, the Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, it's important to point out, Rav Nachman was the one who pushed back against Rabbah to say we're always lenient. And now we're quoting Rav Nachman again. It's the same person who argued before is now the one who's got a Mari Makom on the other side. So the last line reads, are we always lenient with a sulam, with a ladder? Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. We learned the case, Anshe Chatzer v'Anshe Mir Peses, people, Anshe, men of a Chatzer and men of people who live in a Chatzer and a Mir Peses. Rashi here points out that this is like 2 floors and they're connected with a ladder or stairs. And Sheshachachu below Irvu, and they forgot to make an Eruv, these two, top of Samech Aleph, Samech Amud Aleph, says the Gemara. If there is a 4 a smaller entrance in front of this, then Eina Oseres. However, being lav, if we don't have the daka, if we don't have that unique opening, then Oseres. What happened to the fact that we used to say that a sulam is lenient? We see here that the sulam doesn't result in lenient because, as it says 4 lines from the top of Samech Amud Aleph, it says Not 4 lines, 2 lines. V'im lav useres. So if that's the case, we see that a sulam is not always going to be in. We see that a sulam is not always going to be lenient. So how does the Gemara answer that question? Rav Nachman on the one hand says that we follow Rav that it's always lenient, and Rav Nachman later said that we are obviously strict with it. So answers the Gemara 2 lines from the top. Really, the top and the bottom are so close to one another that the ladder is not relevant. It's all one rishus effectively because the upper balcony is within 10 tfachim of where you are. That's very short. You'd have to be a very short person to be under that balcony. 10 tfachim is very small. Nevertheless, that's the case. And so then says the Gemara, if that's true that it's not 10 tfachim tall, the lo gvoa mirpeses asara kikavi daka my have. What's the benefit of making a daka? After all, these 2 things are in the same rishus. Who cares if you make a unique opening? They're all the same rishus. It's all within 10 tfachim, says the Gemara. We're talking about a case where the mirpesa, where the second floor was the megufefes ad eser amos. It really was an enclosed space. And because it was so enclosed, there was only an opening of up to 10. That is actually a very large opening. But halachically speaking, the porch was enclosed. And to kevan to avidaka, and when he made this unique opening, istaluke istaluk le mehacha, he was able to distinguish himself between the upper and lower chatzeros, and that's why the Gemara said being lavo seres. But really, still, Rav Nachman's din still does hold up that we are always lenient by a sulam. It's just here the scenario is different because the second, the porch, the second floor was actually much lower. So we are right now at Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, 7 lines down or so. Samach Amar Aleph Amar Rav Yehuda.
It became the first floor.
They're like all in one rishus. So you can't say that the ladder we should use a ladder for a kula. You can't say that when they're all one rishus. You could say when they're separate rishuyos. That's what we have with the chatzar next to the chatzar. That's fine. But when everything's in one space, the ladder is not going to be your kula. That doesn't work. The ladder is a 0 because you're in one space already. The ladder doesn't connect you to anything. That's the lumdus behind this ladder, is that a ladder is always going to be a kula when it's connecting you to something different. But if you're in the same rishus, the ladder is useless. Doesn't do anything for you. You may as well live in the same house. Nothing changes. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Kosel Sheritzbo Besulamos, Afilu B'Yeser Me'eser. Let's say that you make a wall out of ladders. So says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Toras Mechitza Alav. It has the din of a wall. So it says the Gemara, Rami Le Rav Verona Le Rav Yehuda B'Ma'atzarta Debe Rav Chanina. A Ma'atzarta is like an olive press. So that's where he worked. So he was at work and he asked the kasha and he said, I don't understand. Miyamar Shmuel, does Shmuel really hold what you just said, that if the wall's filled with ladders, that Torah's mechitza alav, and that he's going to be machmer by a sulam? After all, how can he say that? Now this just happened in this whole conversation happened with Rav Nachman, and then it happened again with Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now these are the 2 talmidim who we had initially only learned about Rav Yehuda, that he learned under Rav and Shmuel. Rav Nachman also did such a thing. So Rav Nachman had initially quoted Rav, and then he was quoted Shmuel, and now Rav Yehuda is having a similar conversation quoting Rav. So Rav Yehuda is out there having this conversation, and they said to him, how can you say that Shmuel is of the opinion that a ladder is going to be an area of chumrah? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. This is the same exact text that we saw previously by Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Nothing's going to change. How can you say that Shmuel was machmir? After all, we see that we have these cases of the 2 floors, the second floor and the bottom floor porches, and if and they forgot to make an eruv. So then what's the rule? The halacha is, as we saw earlier, if you have a special entrance, then eno oseres, then it's permissible to go from one to the other, being lav oseres. But if not, then we see that it is oser. So we see what we see from here, that Shmuel has to now answer this question. It's supposed to be, how can you say that it's going to be a kula? Over here we see that it's not a kula. Same as before, because the porch is not even 10 tefachim above, they're really 1 unit. Asks the Gemara, first of the longest lines, if it's not even 10 tall, then who cares about the daka? That makes no difference at all. You're all in 1 unit. Answers the Gemara, because the mirpeses, the porch, was made distinguishable from the lower floor. It's enclosed with all but 10 amos. Same exact questioning. Why are we doing the same questioning twice? Because these are different talmidim that were out in the public talking. Rav Nachman had this conversation in one place, and then later Rabbi Yehuda had it. So it's not being duplicative. The Gemara is not trying to repeat itself intentionally. What it's showing you is that this was a conversation that first started with Rav Nachman and concluded with and continued, I should say, with Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, good. We're 3 lines into the widest lines. Hahu b'nei Kakunoi. They were people who lived in the city of Kakunoi. De'asu l'kamei de Rabbi Yosef. And they went in front of Rabbi Yosef and they said, we need someone to help us build an Eruv. Amru, they said to Rabbi Yosef, Amru le, havlan gavra de le'arevlan masan. Help us find someone who can build an Eruv for our city. So who's going to be the one to build the Eruv for the city? So it says the Gemara, Amr le le'abaye zil arev lehui. So Rabbi Yosef, 3rd century Amorer, said to Abaye, his Talmud, I want you to be the one to go make an Eruv for them. But I want to make sure that it's clear to them that you know what you're talking about. Please don't make me crazy by giving them any chumras. Just do what's required. You don't have to go crazy. Not every chumrah under the sun. Just be yashar about it so that they don't come screaming in the basement. So Azal, Abaye went to Kakunoi. He went to their city and he did an Eruv tour. He wanted to see what the situation was. Because we've been learning about what if it's a city that used to be Yachid and became Rabim? What if it was a city that was Rabim and became Yachid? We need to figure it out. So it says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down, Azal, and he saw that there were a few houses that were open to the river, that were open to a lake. Amar, when it says Amar here, this Gemara is all in Abaye's head. We're trying to project what was going on with Rabba, with Abaye. So Abaye is thinking out loud, as it were. So Abaye, he said in his head, Amar, Hani, these houses that are by the water, lehave shiur lamata. Remember, we learned in our Mishnah in the middle of Nun Testament Aleph, that if you have a city that's Rabim and you're making it Yachid, you cannot be Ma'arev all of it unless there's one section that's different. So says Abaye, I'm going to make these houses the different ones, the ones that are on the water. I'll make them separate, and they're not going to be part of the initial Eruv. Hadar Amar, and then he said to himself, well, no. Hadar Amar. Then he said, Ein ma'arvin es kulatnan. The Mishnah says we're not allowed to be ma'arv everything all at once. Michlal, that you can do them separately. Di'bayi li'iruve matzi ma'arv. You can do it separately. And then he's like, you know what, Ella, really, what should I do? Ella iyave luhu kavui. I should make all the houses by the water have large windows, kavui or windows. Di'ibo, so that if they want, they could li'iruve derech halonos matz me'arve. Di'ibayi li'iruve derech halonos kama matz me'arve. If they want to make an Eruv through the windows, they can. Again, all of this is in Abaye's head. Hadar Amar, and then he said to himself, no, lo bay. They don't even need the windows. Why not? Because because how was Rabba bar Avua? How did he make an Eruv in Mechoza? So what did he do there? So he did so RCS, he did it neighborhood by neighborhood. It wasn't the whole place in one fell swoop. Why not? Because Mishum Pira de Beitorah, we saw this about 35 blot ago, that the cities had these little troughs in between the neighborhoods so that the animals could feed. People would dump their old fruits and vegetables there. The animals don't mind that they're a little spoiled. They'll eat them happily. Put in some grains in there. It's a full diet. So they couldn't even make the whole thing one Eruv because they had interrupters. They had these little ditches there. What were they supposed to do? So it says the Gemara, to call chad v'chad havashir l'chabre. So let's say neighborhood number 1 in Mechoza, they can build their own Eruv, and the neighborhood number 2 was its extra city that wasn't included in the Eruv, and vice versa. So that works out nicely. And they were not allowed to make the whole Eruv themselves. And then he said to himself out loud, well, Hadar Amar Lo Dami, but really the case of the Arsiyasa, the case of Mechoza, where we did piecemeal, the Eruvin in Mechoza were piecemeal, that's not similar to our case. Hasam, in the case of Mechoza with the neighborhoods, there they were built like the old city of Yerushalayim. I've done this before, where you've walked on like the rooftop above the shuk in the old city. All the roofs are perfectly, they're all very close together. So then they're all unified. So then the Gemara says, Abaye is saying in his own head, I can't compare the city of Kakunai to the case of Mechoza. By Mechoza, all the roofs are connected. I could get everywhere. So then it's really one unit. But over there, in the case of Kakunai, that wasn't true. Hani lo ma'arve. Hilkach na'avdin kabay. So then maybe I should go back to the windows idea. And then Hadar Amar, and then he says, no, I'm going back to what I said before. Kavui nami lo bay. I don't need the windows. And now we're getting to the end of his train of thinking. Why? Because de'ahu beitivna, there was a storehouse, a granary. Dehavale lamar bar pupidisa mi pumpedisa. This person lived in Pumpedisa. Vishav Yashir Lepopadisa. He realized that there was industrial sections of the community that he would leave out for the Eruv, which is perfect. So that's what we could do in our neighborhood as well. We would intentionally leave out, let's say, I don't think they built it this way, but let's say in theory, on Howard, on the corner of Howard and McCormick, they could leave out that big building there. Nobody needs that. I mean, we need the building, but nobody needs it for their Eruv. So maybe they left out this space to be the shiur, to be the exception, to fulfill the din of our Mishnah. Amar, and then he lastly said to himself, and this will bring us to the two dots. Hainu de Amar limar. This is what my Rabbi Yosef told me. You have to make sure that you don't drive everybody crazy. So he did all of the mental gymnastics, halachic gymnastics in his head. He thought through the sugya clearly before he opened his mouth. Good measure for a posek. Think before you speak. It's very hard to take back psukim. If you give out a kula, you're done for, because you can't go back and say, wait, really, we should be machmir. And he wanted to make sure that he was giving the right measured psak. So this is a great sampling of a Talmud Chacham. So this is Abaye. It's Abaye V'Rava. It's Abaye. To think things through very, very carefully. Next two dots. We are 2/3 of the way down on Samach Hamad Aleph. We pointed out in the Mishnah in the Testament Aleph that in a scenario where a person wants to take a city that was Rabim and you want to make an Eruv, you have to leave out a small city, and it can be like the city of Chadasha, that had 50 people in it. So it says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, Tanya, the Brisa writes, Amar Yehuda, Irachas Haisa Yehuda beChadasha Shema. There was a city in Yehuda, in that part of Eretz Yisrael, and the name of the city was Chadasha. There were a total of exactly 50 people who lived there, men, women, and children. That was the city that they used as the type of city, the type of a part of a city that we would exclude when making an Eruv of Rabim into an Eruv, because we wanted to just make sure that it was safe. So we would leave one place out to remind everyone of the Eruv. That was the case. So what about Chadasha itself? Does Chadasha count? Now remember what our Mishnah said. Our Mishnah said that you have a city, and then as an addendum, as an appendage to the city, you leave out Chadasha. So big city, and then on the corner, on the side, you have a little Chadasha. So the Gemara says, what about Chadasha? Says the Gemara, I'm not sure I understand your question. Asks the Gemara, Chadasha ki yechi de'ihi hav yashir l'gdola, just like the little appendage of the city of Chadasha is what's left out as it relates to the big city, so too Gdola Nami have Yashir L'Ktana. Then the big city is what's left out for Shir. So they can both build their own Eruvin. That's fine. They're both allowed to build their own Eruvin. What they're not allowed to do is all be in one Eruv. And that was a takana that the Chachamim made. Again, the Mishnah, Nun Testament Aleph here, to make sure that in a case of Rabin, V'naseh, Shel Yachid, when you're making an Eruv in a place which is pretty public, you have to make sure that there's something distinct that reminds people that they're not allowed to carry. And to do so, they would make an Eruv, but they would leave an area of the Eruv, they would leave an area of the city that was not part of the Eruv. So it says, I don't even understand your question. Why are you asking about Chadasha? Pasha that Chadasha is fine, because Chadasha was connected to the big city. And just like Chadasha could be the Shir, could be what's left out for the big city to make an Eruv, vice versa also true. Chadasha is allowed to make an Eruv within itself because it has the big city to be its Shir. That was left out of Chadasha. So it works in both directions. I don't understand your question. So it says the Gemara, Elakain Chadasha ma. What about other cities that are like Chadasha? So that's subject to a machloket. So Huna.
How can Chadasha use a city that has an Eruv? The whole I thought we're giving a.
What we're saying is that,
so
if you look in the Mishnah on New Testament Aleph, I'll just read the language here. It says, V'shel Rabim v'naseh shel yachid, you have a public space, and you want to make an Eruv. Ein me'arvin es kula, you're not allowed to make an Eruv around all of it. Ela im kain, unless you exclude chutza lakir chadasha shebihuda. If you have this place which used to be very public, let's just say West Rogers Park, and let's assume that it was clearly defined in a box of some kind, we'd have to cut out a little bit of that Eruv and say, you can't be part of it. That space has to be similar to Chadasha, which has approximately 50 inhabitants. So that's what's happening here, is that we're concerned that you're just going to think that it's mutter to carry on Shabbos. Right. How are we going to make sure you don't make that mistake? Right. By forcing your hand and saying you cannot make a perfect square around West Rogers Park. You have to leave out a little chunk in the corner, Chadasha, I don't know, Howard's, whatever it is. So that's the model that the Gemara came up with, that the Chachamim came up with, to ensure that we wouldn't make this mistake. However, the city of Chadasha could make its own Eruv. That's fine. That's totally fine. It used to be public. Yes, it used to be public. And what did it leave out of its Eruv? The big city that it was next to. So they can feed off each other. That's fine. The big city can make an Eruv around itself and leave out Chadasha. And Chadasha can make an Eruv around itself and not. As long as they're not in the same Eruv, then you're fulfilling this din properly. So that's how the Gemara explains this idea of Chadasha. So we're about 3/4 of the way down. Elakein Chadasha Mahu. What about other cities that are like Chadasha? Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, Chad Amar Bayashir, Chad Amar Lo Bayashir. What about a city of Chadasha 50 that's standalone? It's not connected to a large city. Does that need anything? Is 50 considered Rabim enough that we would need to have another city to be excluded or a part of the city to be excluded? That's subject to a machlokas samorim. Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, one says Bayashir. Yes, you need to exclude something from the city. The Chad Amar Lo Bayashir, and we paskin like the latter. And we're at the 2 dots toward the bottom of the page, right above the Mishnah. Rav Shimon, Omer, Gimel Chatzeros. You see, in our Mishnah, we have learned that you either have the city of Chadasha, or if you look back in our Mishnah, we'll see the Shita of Rav Shimon, who said that no, you don't have to leave out a city of Chadasha 50 people. You can even exclude a Chatzer that has a couple of houses in it, and that would be considered totally fine. Gimel Chatzeros, 3 Chatzeros with houses in. Amar Rabbi Chama Bar Guria, Amar Rav, Halacha Kereb Shimon. We don't paskin like the sheet of Chadasha. We paskin like the sheet of Reb Shimon, that we have to exclude these 3 Chatzeros that each have 2 houses, and then the rest of the city can have its own Eruv. That's fine. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, Afilu Beis Bayis Echad v'Chatzer Achas. Even if you have only 1 house and 1 Chatzer. Havamina is that they're separate. Chatzer Achas Sal Kadaitach. What are you talking about? No one's using the Chatzer. No, that's ridiculous. We don't mean that the 2 are separate. They're one entity. Now, this Rabbi Yitzchak is very interesting because on the one hand, he's not quoted in a brisa, but he's arguing with Rav Shimon. So the Meforshim here explained that he's Taka Atana. He's not an Amora, otherwise he wouldn't be able to argue with the sheet of Rav Shimon in the Mishnah. Amar le'abai le'Rav Yosef. This is one of my favorite pieces of Gemara. I love this, the conclusion of this. Says the Gemara, we're right before the Mishnah in Samach Hamad Aleph. Amar le'abai le'Rav Yosef. Abai, the Talmud, says to his Rebbe, Rav Yosef, Hader Rav Yitzchak, this sheet of Rav Yitzchak, where he says that even 1 house in a Chatzer is sufficient to exclude from a city in order to make an Eruv around everything but that house and Chatzer. Is that a Gemara or Svara? Does he have a tradition? Does he have a Mesorah that that's the case? Or no, does he have a Svara? How did he come up with this? So says the Rebbe, says Rav Yosef to Abai, Amar Le, Man nafkalon mino. I don't understand what the difference is. Who cares? Why do you make a difference to how he learned it out? So it says the Gemara right before the Mishnah, Amar Le, Abai says to his Rebbe, Gemara Gemor, Zimurta Tehei. You want me to learn Gemara? What is this, lyrics to a song? Well, you got to teach me Torah. I want to understand how things work. And this idea I shared recently when we crossed this Gemara, that if you want to learn how to paskin shailas, you have to learn from the beginning of the sugya all the way to the end. The learning in the beginning is harder, but in conclusion, you'll be a much better posek. You're much more knowledgeable. I don't answer shailas often, but when people call me, I find that there are pockets in learning because I needed to sit in Kolo for another 10 years and I didn't do that. So if you want to be a real posek, you got to buckle down and learn endlessly. It needs nonstop. Do you know how old Rabbi Akiva was?
Like 40.
40.
Just
getting started.
Right now.
Mark Halpert is going to be the posek hador. You heard it here, and it's recorded now. Mirz Hashem.
You twisted my words there. That's not recording if you're listening.
They can't hear you. They can only hear me. So it works out great. Next Mishnah, bottom of Samach Hamad Aleph. Says the Mishnah, I can't hear you either. Misha Haya b'Mizrach, if a person was on the east, V'amar lebno arev li b'marav, and he says to his son, please go make an Eruv for me on the west. So seemingly he's on the east, where is he here? Yeah, he's on the east of the city. And he says, please go make me an Eruv on the west, or the reverse. B'marav v'amar lebno arev li b'Mizrach. He's on the west and says to his son, please make me an Eruv on the east. So, im yesh heimenu, if there is from, this is the father now, from him, ula beso alpayim ama, if there's only 2,000 to his house, ula eruvo yoser mikan, and more than that, yoser, mikan mutter lebeso v'asr le'eruvo, then it's permissible only for you to go to your house, which is within 2,000 amos, but not for the eruv. We'll see how all of this works out in the Gemara. Le'eruvo alpayim ama, ula beso yoser mikan, if you are 2,000 amos from your eruv, and more than 2,000 amos from your home, then asr lebeso mutter le'eruvo. Then you can go to your eruv, but you can't go to your house. We'll see how all these logistics work out in the Gemara.
That kind of seems a little fishy.
It sounds backwards. It does. Only because we're missing information. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Anasi wanted from us. He wanted us to read this Mishnah and say, that doesn't sound right, says Michael Feeder. Of course, again, then that forces you to learn the Gemara, because there's no way that this Mishnah makes sense in a vacuum. We just have to understand it. We have to figure it out. Let's finish off the Mishnah, 2 lines from the bottom. As we've spoken about it, we're in Parakate Side Ma'abra, and we said that when we are creating the line from which we measure the Tchum, so that's Be'ibura Shel. So whatever that line is, if you put your Eruv within the Ibur Shel lo asav lo klum. That's inside your city limits. That's a 0. That doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't give you any extra distance, because you'd have to go outside the Ibur Shel in order to get any distance. Nasnu chutz l'tchum. What if you put it outside of the tchum? Havamina, that it's outside the 2,000 amos. That's the Havamina, because when we say Tchum, we mean Tchum Shabbos. That's in 2,000 amos. The Gemara will reject this. So it says the Gemara, Filu Ama Achas, if you go out even 1 Amma, turning to the top of Samach Amud Beis, says the Gemara, says the end of the Mishnah, Masheniskar Hu Mafsid. If you go 1 Amma outside of your Tchum in one direction, then you can only go 1999 in the other, right? Because it's sliding with you. So if the city is my Gemara right here, so if I put my Eruv here, so then my 2,000 amos, I lose a little bit on this side. It's going to just be a sliding scale. So we have to just figure out how all this is going to work. But that's what the Gemara says right here. That's what the Mishnah says, is that if you put your Eruv outside the Tchum, and again, we're going to qualify the words outside the Tchum, so don't yet quote me on that. But if you put it outside the Tchum, because that's the language of the Mishnah, then you lose on the other side. So let's see how all of this works. Says the Gemara, this is Michael Feeder's question. How do these cases work that you could possibly be closer to your Eruv than you could be to your house? Kasal Kadaitach, you might have thought, Lemizrach Beso, that when he said he was on the east, he was to the east of his house, and Lemarav Beso, when he told his kid, and then when he sent his kid to the west, and then when it says he was Lemarav and he sent his kid to the east, he was to the west of his house. Third line, Samach Amud Beis, Bishlama Heimenu Ule Beso Alpaim Ama Ule Rubo Yeser Mikan. I could understand Pshat based on this Kasal Kadaitach. I could understand a case where he is 2,000 amos, less than 2,000 from his house, and more than 2,000 from his Eruv. Because what would be the flow of events? I'm over here, my house is over here, and the Eruv is over here. That makes perfect sense to me, right? I'm sitting in my yard, and I'm standing on the east side of town next to here, and my house is over here, and I send my kid out to the west to make an Eruv for me. That makes perfect sense. Good. Then Mishkachasla, then I understand. Demati lebeisei, that he could reach his house, Velamati le'eruvo. That makes perfect sense. However, if we say that from him to his Eruv is up to 2,000 amos, with our starting Metzias on the top line of Kasal Kadaitach, that when we say he was to the east, it was to the east near his house. So then how does it work? He's over here, he's on the east, and he says to his kid, please go to the west and make an Eruv. So we assumed he's near his house, so it's the person, the father, the house, and he sends the son out here. So how then could you possibly be closer to your Eruv? So the Gemara is going to present 2 different answers. 6, 7 lines down, Samach Amud Beis says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yitzchak, Misavras lemizrach beso, lemarav beso. You thought that when I said it was to the east, it meant to the east of his house? No, he could have been very close to his Eruv, just that, lemizrach bino. He was just to the east of his son, Lamarav Beno. So now here's what changes. So now the guy is standing, let's say, toward the west side of the city, but to the east of his son. So I'm standing over here in the east. My son is here, and I said, can you please go make me an Eruv? Where's my house? Over here. Who cares where you're? We're not talking about the house now. This is where the father is. He's working the field on Friday afternoon, and he says, son, go make me an Eruv. So he puts it over here. It's less than 2,000 amos, but to his house, it's 2,500 amos. So the Gemara says that we're requalifying the Mishnah. When you heard in the Mishnah that he was on the east and he sent his son to the west, you thought it was east, close to my house. Wrong, not correct. That's answer number 1. Answer number 1 says Rav Yitzchak is that when the Mishnah says, I am to the east, it doesn't mean to the east of the house. It means just to the east of my son. And therefore, I could easily be within 2,000 amos of my Eruv and not within 2,000 amos of my house. The Gemara presents another answer. Says the Gemara, Rava Bar Rav Shila Amar, Afilu Tema Lemizrach Beitso, Ulamarav Lemarav Beitso. So we can even go with the initial understanding of the Gemara, and not this new Mechudash answer that east means east of the child, but rather it could mean of the house as well. Kigon Dekoi Beise Ba'alach Sona. No, it could just be, it's a big picture here in Rashi. It was a triangle. We assumed a linear line of house, a father and house, and then sent the son off to the side. Lavdafka. Maybe the picture depicts it nicely. I have it here in my in the Oz V'Hadar. It's drawn up very nicely. Mikomo, that's where I'm standing. And he sends his son to go to the west, which is away from where he is. But everything is in a V shape. So my Eruv is all the way out there, and my house is over there. And maybe it's less than 2,000 to the Eruv and more than 2,000 to my house. So we, again, in our brains, we just assumed a linear line. Lavdafka. That's not true. So these are two very solid answers, very different answers that we're just talking about on an angle. That brings us to the two dots, 1/3 of the way down on Samech Amud Beis. Let's continue. And there we really needed the v'chule here. What's in between the two dots here is not what we need. We needed the line that's on the bottom of Samech Amud Aleph in the Mishnah, which says Nasno chutz l'tchum. Says the Gemara, where we are, Samech Amud Beis, 2/3 of the way down, chutz l'tchum. What are you talking about? Salka daitach? If you put it outside of your 2,000 amos, you have 0. You can't get to it. What good does that do? If this is the end of my ibur, and I put my eruv 2,500 amos out, forget that. That's a 0. That can't be the case here. The case cannot be talking about where it's outside chutz l'tchum, sal kadaitach. That's not possible. Ella ema chutz leibura. What the Mishnah meant is that it's once the tchum counting begins, which is outside the ibur. Again, we're paraketzad ma'abrin. So what we're saying is that you defined your line very clearly about where the ibur ends, and therefore we're going to start counting our tchum. That's where you threw your eruv, outside that space. So let's say the ibur shelir, whatever it is, you're going to, I'm on number 1 of your 2,000. That's what we're talking about. Says the Gemara, what does the Mishnah mean when it says mashiniskaru mafsid? So what I explained it is that we have this sliding 2,000 amos, and if you take 1 amma outside your ibur on one side, so then it pulls and draws from whatever's left of the 2,000 on the other side. The Gemara doesn't seem to like that. Mashiniskar v'sulo. That doesn't make any sense. We have to look at this because we have a brisa halfway down Samech Amud Beis. If a person puts this is a brisa, so it's going to sound somewhat similar to our Mishnah in the beginning. If you put your eruv inside the ibura shalir lo asav lo klum, we know that does nothing because ibura shalir is a place that you're already allowed to reach. So it doesn't help you to do that, which means you can also walk 2,000 amos from it. Putting an eruv in your ibur is not helpful at all. However, Nasno chutz leibura shalir. This language would have been better in our Mishnah. We didn't have this. We had chutz l'tchum. If you put the eruv outside the ibur shalir, afilu ama achas mistaker osa ama umafsides kol ha'ir kula. You lose the whole city. Mipnei shemidas ha'ir ola lo b'midas ha'tchum. So we started with the havamim that if I have my tchum, if I have my city, and I decide I'm going to take my eruv and put it right outside the ibura shalir. So if I take up 3 amos here, I'm left with 1997 on the other side. This brisa just said, no, the calculations include the city. So what are you talking about? You don't have 1993 on the other side. Your counting starts here, doesn't skip the city. So you don't have 1997 on the other side. So that's what the Gemara's question is that we have Mari Makomos that don't seem to agree with our Havamin of the Mishnah. Again, to say again, our Mishnah assumed that if you went 1 amma outside the Ibura Shalir on one side, you have 1999 on the other side of the city. Says the Gemara, we have a brisa that disagrees. Answers the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, Samech Amud Beis Lokasha, that this is not a difficulty. Kan shekol samidaso bechatzi ha'ir. In one case, where we say that the city counts, where we count the city itself as part of the measurement, that's where 2,000 amos ends in the middle of the city. However, kan shekol samidaso besofa ha'ir. No, here in our case, in our Mishnah, the city itself is not 2,000 amos. So let's create a scenario. Let's say that my Gemara is a city and it's 1,500 amos. I take my Eruv and I put it outside of the Ibura Shelir by 3 amos. So then the city is treated like a 0 because it's only 1,500 amos. And then I have 1997 on the other side. However, let's say that my Gemara was a city and it was 2,500 amos. And then I take my Eruv and I put it outside the Ibura Shelir. So then I have 3 on this side, but I have nothing on the other side because the whole city was larger than 2,000. So that's the distinction that the Gemara is making. And not only that, not only do we have it as an answer to this brisa, but this idea was stated explicitly. This idea was stated explicitly. Rav Idi, the Amar Rav Idi, Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Hayamoded Uba v'Chalsa Midas v'Chatzi Ha'ir. The person's measuring, and their measuring ends in the middle of the city, Ein lo ela chatzi ha'ir. A beautiful Mari Makom. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi already said what we needed to say. This is the answer to our question. Kol semidas b'sof ha'ir. What happens if we have the whole city and the city is smaller than 2,000 amos? Then nases lo ha'ir kula kedalet amos umashlim lo asashar. The city is treated like his own dalet amos, and then you have 3 on one side and 1997 on the other, because the city is much smaller. It's dalet amos, as it were. Do you also deduct the Dalet Amos? That's a good question. I don't even know. I just made that up right now. I have no idea. If the city is treated like Dalet Amos, so then do we say 3 outside the Ibur Shalir, 4 for the city, because it's like your Dalet Amos, which is 7, and then 1993 on the other side? I don't know. I just thought of it now. I don't know. Good question. But
you have your city.
Yeah.
Then you put your Eruv here. Don't you get 2,000 from the Eruv one way?
Or the other. Right, that's what the Gemara is assuming, right? How does it work in the other direction? Yeah,
that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right, you for sure would have it. You can't use both. You can't double dip. You have to pick one. But if you put it here, you really need it to go there. It works as long as the city is less than 2,000 amos. Correct. Okay, let's continue. We are 4 lines from the bottom. Samach Amud Beis says the Gemara Amar Avidi Ein Elu Ela Divrei Nevius. There's a discussion in the Rishonim here. Is this a compliment or not? These words must be prophetic in nature. What words are they? Here are the words that are prophetic. Mali kalsa b'chatzi ha'ir, mali kalsa b'sof ha'ir. The Gemara says, who cares which one I end in? It's very difficult to understand. And the Balei Tosos here point out, long Tosos, we're just going to read the first few words. The last Tosos on the page, 3/4 to 2/3 of the way down, Dibur HaMaschil, Ein Elu Ela Divrei Nevius, Omer Ri, B'chol Makom she'omer Ein Elu Ela Divrei Nevius have l'shvach. Klamar ein chachma kazu shemevin lechalek kol kach svara mu'etes uvruach hakodesh amar. Wow, this idea is that the distinction between the 2 cities. So says the Gemara, Amar Rava, I don't mean to burst anyone's bubbles, but like, why are you calling this prophetic? We literally have a brisa that makes this distinction. So says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Tarvaihu Tanani. First of all, I don't know what you're talking about. And second of all, I don't know why it's prophetic. Why? Because, says the brisa, Anshe Ir Gdola, you have people in a large city. Mehalchen es kol ir ktana. They can walk the whole small city. But the people in the small city are not allowed to walk in the larger city. Top of Samach Aleph Amud Aleph asks the Gemara, second line, my taima. What is the reason why the large city can walk in the small city, but the people in the small city can't walk in the large city? So it says the Gemara, my taima, lav mishum, isn't that because in one case, tahani kalsa midasan bechatzi ha'ir, when the small city is using its 2,000 amos, it ends somewhere in the middle of the large city, so they're limited. But in the reverse, vahani, in the large city, kalsa midasan b'sof ha'ir, and in the small city, the large people can walk the small city because it's swallowed in the 2,000 amos. So that's a beautiful answer. So why then, why do you think that all of this is prophetic? But Rabbi, what would you say? So the Gemara answers on behalf of Rabbi, Anshe Tani. Our Mishnah was talking about people, umokim labinosing. There's actually a machlokas in the text of our brisa that we have on the bottom. Our version is like with Edi, where it says Anshe. And when he says Anshe, that means that there's people that are trying to become bonded together. And what does that mean? Umokim labinosing. They made an Eruv with each other. Rabbi Edi says they made an Eruv with each other. Your answer of big city, small city, that the 2,000 amos end in the middle of the city or they end after, that's not relevant here. They made an Eruv with each other, says Rabbi Edi. Aval modeh lo tznan. It's not talking about measuring. So where do you come up with your answer in the Gemara that we just said on line 2? So the Gemara rejects it. Lo, really? No measuring. We have a Mishnah. So we have a Mishnah that speaks about measuring. So answers the Gemara on behalf of Rabbi Iti, no. That Mishnah is to teach us about Sof Ha'ir Isruchale Delotznan. The end of a city is not spoken about in a Mishnah explicitly anywhere. Take a look at Rashi, about 20 lines down. Rashi, Dibur HaMaschil, 2 inches below where we are, Dibur HaMaschil, Sof Ha'ir Isruchale. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi la'ashmu inan, tehecha de kalsu midas v'sof ha'ir, havya kol ha'ir kedal ramos delotznan lo. What we learned from this Mishnah back in the Gemara, 5 lines down, which says v'hatznan v'limdo cha'amru nosten lo alpaim amma, which is that if your 2,000 amos ends after a city, that whole city is treated like a dalet amos. That's a chiddush, and that we needed from this Mishnah. So that's how the Gemara would explain that. Amar Rav Nachman, to validate the shitas here, and really, this is a wonderful synopsis of this Gemara, says the Gemara as follows. Amar Rav Nachman, Mandatani Anshe lo mishtabesh, the one who has in the Girsa in our Brisa on the bottom of the page of Anshe, like we said Rav Idi did, or lo mishtabesh, he doesn't have the wrong girsa. Umandatani ein anshe, where it doesn't have the word anshe, lo mishtabesh, they're also not making a mistake. And here's why not. Mandatani anshe lo mishtabesh tamokim lavanose, because we established that case where they were nosing, where they made an Eruvin between the two cities, between the Ir Gadol and Ir Katana. Umandatani ein anshe lo mishtabesh tamokim lavimoded, and where those who had in our brisa without the word anshe, that's not that's not a problem, because the mokim labimoded, that was a case where they were moded, where they actually measured. And really, here is how we should understand the brisa that we saw on the bottom of the page, the brisa that Rabbi brought to argue with Ravidi. Here's Pshat. Anshe Ir Gdola, about 10 lines down. Anshe Ir Gdola mahalchen is kol Ir Katana. The large city can walk throughout the small city when they're right next to each other, but not the reverse. But you cannot have them walking through a larger city. The smaller people cannot walk through the larger city. That's true when it comes to measurements. Yes, of course, everyone agrees that when you are measuring, if the city gets swallowed by the 2,000, you can walk there. That's Ir Gadol and Ir Katana. But when the people from the small city are walking in the big city, if the 2,000 almost ends in the middle of the big city, nothing to talk about. Then that should not work. However, aval mishahaya be'ir gedola v'hiniach es eruvo be'ir ktana. If you put your eruv from the big city into the small, or haya be'ir ktana v'hiniach es eruvo be'ir gedola, if you put eruvs in both places, then mahalach es kula v'chutz la'payim amba. Then it's all one big family unit. The large city and the small city are all the same. That's when you put in an eruv, and that explains our case very well. Almost halfway down.
So you can put two separate areas.
It's Eruvin Chatzeros, effectively. We're making, or it's Eruvin Tchumen. We're making, I'm putting by you, you're putting by me, and that works. Eruvin Chatzeros.
So two different people.
So it's a big city and the small city. The big city and the small city can make it. Yeah, so if I put one in your city on behalf of my inhabitants, and you put one in my city on behalf of yours, so then we're all one big family. We basically became one community. That was actually a big, difficult tumult to connect just L'Dugma. It's not a perfect match, but to make the Chicago Eruv connect with the Skokie Eruv was not pashut. There was a lot of halachas involved in connecting Eruvin and one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid, where you got to be careful. Like it's just not simple. So it's a little similar to this, not exactly, but yes, that's how the Gemara concludes here, which is Chatzuri Mechzor B'Hachik Tani, and the brisa that Rava quoted can be understood according to everyone. Amar of Yosef, middle of the page, Samach Aleph Amar Aleph, getting close to the Mishnah at the bottom, where we will pause for tonight. Amar, 7 minutes. Amar Rami Bar Abba, Amar Rav Huna. Irshi Yoshevas al Svas HaNachal. If you have a house that sits on the edge of a waterway, if there is something by the waterway, which is basically a safety barrier of some kind, so that people don't fall in the water, then we measure from there, because since there's a space where there is protection from someone falling in the water, so therefore that space is now usable. However, being lav, if there was nothing to help people from falling in the water, then that space is not usable. And ain modedin la elami pesach besa. Then you can only measure from the opening of your house. Amar le Abaye daka arba amos amras lan Allah. Why does it have to be 4 amos? Ma'ishnami kol daka de alma de arba. Why does it have to be different than any other case? We saw earlier that not all of them are arba. We saw here that this one is arba. Amar le hasam lo beisa tashmishta. In regards to what was the language here? Move it, sir. Amar arba. Yeah. So says the Gemara, "My shami kol daki de alma de arba amarle hasam lo beisa tashmishta hacha beisa tashmishta." If you remember, we saw earlier that remember when we had the 2 levels, the porch and the one underneath, and we said what distinguished one from the other was that it was enclosed and it had a smaller opening. There we didn't say dalet amos. Why not? Because there, lo beisa tashmishta, we didn't need anything to be done with that. We just needed a distinction to be made. Hacha, here by the waterway, when we're putting up a dalet amos wall, that's beisa tashmishta. It has a function in addition to being a heker. It has a function, so therefore it has to actually be dalet amos. Amar of Yosef bin Aminallah. How do I know that what I'm saying is true? Because the Tanya, the Brisa writes, Hiter Rebbe sheyehu b'nei Geder yordan l'chamsan. The people who lived in Geder were allowed to go to the city of Chamsan. However, ve'ein b'nei Chamsan olam legader. The people who lived in Bnei Chamsan were not allowed to go to Gader. Says the Gemara, my time, why not? Isn't it because the Hani Avud Daka, the Hani Lo Avud Daka? Isn't it because that one of the cities made a unique entrance and the other one didn't? Says the Gemara, no, that's not why. Kiasa Rabdimi Amar, he explained why was it that Rabbi didn't allow the people from Gader to go to Chamsan, but why didn't he allow the people from Bnei Chamsan to go to Gader? Because first of the longest lines on Samach Aleph Amad Aleph, the reason why is because Tatruge Mitatrege Luhu Bnei Gader Bnei Chamsan. Because the people of Bnei Gader would torture and annoy and pester the people who lived in Bnei Chamsan. They didn't have a good relationship. Well, my heater. But look 3 lines into above the widest lines. It said the Brisa writes Hitir Rebbe. What do you mean Hitir? It says Gemara Hiskin. It was a takana. You're only allowed to go in one direction, not in both, because one people was torturing the other. Well, Maishna Shabbos. If that's the case, who cares about Shabbos? During the week, you're going to go there. They're violent people. They're going to steal from you. Why would you want to go there? It says Gemara the Shchicha B'Shichrus, because on Shabbos people are more likely to drink, and when you're more likely to drink, you're more likely to misbehave. So it says the Gemara, Ki azle lahasam, nami mitatregelu. But I don't understand. Fine, they can't come to us, but if we go to them, they're gonna take revenge on us, right? We're the mean guys. All of a sudden, we're gonna go down there. They're gonna take revenge on us. It says the Gemara, kalba below mate, a dog that doesn't have a city, shev shnin lo navach. He won't bark for 7 years. Namely, when you're out of your element, hopefully your behavior is a little bit better. That's why the kids at home are usually less behaved, and when they're out in public, they're this idea, this psychology. Hashtanami metatrege b'nei chamsan b'nei gader. No matter under all circumstances, they're still going to be annoyed at each other. They're still going to fight no matter what. So it says the Gemara, we're not going to totally cut them off from each other. Kulei lo kaifelu. We're not going to be that strict. So that's what Rebbe. If we go back up to the Brisa, 3 lines above the wide lines, 4 lines. If we read it again, we'll understand a little more. Hitir hiskin Rebbe sheyu b'nei gader yodan lechamsan b'nei chamsan olam legader. Just to make sure we're allowing communication. We're not totally shutting you out, but some of these people are a little misbehaved. So they can only, the people who are the attackers can go to the other city, but not vice versa. We are 4 lines into the widest line, says the Gemara, Rav Safra Amar Ir Ha'asuya Kikeshes Havoi. Really what's going on here between these 2 cities is that they were shaped in a unique way, in a keshes. Rashi here, a lengthy Rashi at the bottom. We don't have time for Rashi, but Rashi explains how the shape of one of these cities impacts who can attend which one, because the keshes, as we spoke about, if it's more than 4,000 amos wide at the end of the keshes, if it's more than 4,000 amos wide, then they measure 2,000 from their house. However, if another city were to be within a certain distance, then they can overlap most of the city, even though we couldn't make there. So basically, what the Gemara is saying in the name of Rav Safra is that one city had a logistical issue to get to the other one, but the other one was able to access. Had nothing to do with the violence. And another answer, Rav Dimi Bar Chanina Amar Anshe Ir Gdolav Anshe Ir Ktana Havai. It was like the big city, small city, which is why they could only visit in one direction. The small city couldn't visit the big city, but the big city could visit the small city. Now, Rav Kahana Masni Hachi, Rav Tuvima Masni Hachi. All that we've said so far is in the name of Rav Kahana, all the way the Shitas are quoted. But Rav Tivumi Masni Hachi, he quoted this a little bit differently. Rav Safra Rav Dimi Bar Chinana, Chad Amar Ir Hasuya Kikeshes Havai, the Chad Amar Ir Ktana Va'anshe Ir Gdola Havai. It's just a different way to phrase the machlokes, but this is basically 4 different answers as to how we understand Rebbe's distinction between the cities of Gader and Chamsan, why one could go to the other and why the other could not go to it. We will stop here and pick up in Yirtzeh Hashem at the next Mishnah on Shabbos for another blot and a half. Achag Sameach.